biological field station is someplace where people interested in entire organisms and populations get together and do field research.
It's just a protected area where we can do research over a long period of time.
It's a set of resources that are managed and protected primarily for research and education.
A biological field station is a large laboratory with infinite number of resources that enable students to use their imagination and ask questions.
It has support services like maybe a lab, a staff, somewhat closed off to public access.
A biological field station is a place where we find out what the world is really like.
Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve has been protected by Stanford University as a research and education site since 1973. Over the years, it has remained green, in stark contrast to the suburban expansion of Silicon Valley that encroaches upon its borders. But Jasper Ridge is not preserved for human recreation. It is not a place to picnic on a sunny South Bay weekend. This small parcel of land, a mere 1,200 acres, has the potential to affect lives all around the globe. Here scientists study the changes in the biosphere due to the steady advance of human impact. And the answers they find on Jasper Ridge can provide guidance on how to address some of the grave issues humans confront in our role as stewards of the planet.
It's curious, but if you talk to most of the people, most of the faculty and research scientists who do work on Jasper Ridge, you find that they're all interested not only on the specific systems on Jasper Ridge, but the relevance of the findings that they have to larger problems of the world.
The research we've done at Jasper Ridge has advanced the field of biology primarily by showing the enormous value of long-term research. The National Science Foundation used it as a model of long-term research programs, and we're still struggling to get ecologists to spend more time looking over long periods of time at single systems, and that's what we've done.
Jasper Ridge straddles the San Andreas Fault, but it also includes several other lesser faults within it. And a result of that geologic diversity, there's diversity in the kinds of soils that are found here, and also in the biotic resources. For example, in the plant communities, there are over 700 species of vascular plants here. There's tremendous diversity of species of birds. There's also many species of mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. This enormous number of organisms is just a large living laboratory for the students at Stanford to study.
Most people think that biologists know what's adequate for virtually every kind of organism, how big their populations are, what changes there have been in the past, and actually around the globe there's only a handful of organisms, of plants and animals that we know that kind of information about, and one of that handful is the bay checkerspot butterfly on Jasper Ridge. It's almost a unique study. One of the big lessons that we learned from our experience at Jasper Ridge is that even though it's a substantial area, something on the order of 1,200 acres, it is not adequate to preserve a species of butterfly. So around the world we know that not only do you have to preserve the largest possible area if you want to preserve biodiversity, but we've also learned that you need a great deal of topographic heterogeneity, that is hills and valleys, different slopes and so on. That came from our long-term work with the bay checkerspot butterfly. In fact, if we had stopped our studies at the end of 4 years, we would not have properly understood what's going on up there.
Well, there are very few places in the world where you have a research station of the size and the complexity and the richness so close to a campus. We're just 15 minutes away from the campus. And what this means is that students can get here in a very short amount of time, and they can do it year-round. In many places in the world, Students have to travel hours or even days to get to their research station, so they do more episodic experiments and measurements and observations. Here, observations can be made continuously. Jasper Ridge is a very good place to study the natural ecosystems. The biotic diversity of the world is being threatened by invasive species. Species which originate in one continent are now found in another. The major biogeographic barriers of the world have been broken down. We're getting a mixing of the biota. Jasper Ridge provides a place for detailed studies on the progress of invasions and how they're affecting the natural ecosystems.
The two major invasion studies that are current at Jasper Ridge look at invasion of a plant species, yellow star thistle, and invasion of an ant species, Linopithema humuli, or the Argentine ant.
Since 1993, we've been coming out to Jasper Ridge 3 times a year and essentially walking around looking for ants to see who's where. So this is Prenolepis here, and she's just out walking around. And one of the things I'm interested in is understanding how it is that this ant coexists with such an invasive species that wherever it's introduced, it displaces the native ant species. That is, it makes them go locally extinct. So I'm going to set up some baits of tuna and honey to induce interactions. So if I'm this ant Prenolepis imparus, and I happen upon this dish, and it turns out that Argentine ants are already eating the protein, then I might be forced to eat the honey. That's what I'm interested in, to see how interactions affect diet choice and how they affect which resources are utilized by species. It turns out that ants are ecology's movers and shakers. But ants actually move more soil than earthworms do. It also turns out that ants are the primary scavengers of the world. So when crickets die and fall to the ground and beetles desiccate, ants are the animals that carry all those things away for us. And you can imagine what it might be like if you had to walk out to get your morning newspaper and all of that stuff just stayed on the ground. So we need to know something about what are the mechanisms that allow invasive species to be successful, and what are characteristics of communities that allow them to deter biological invasions.
Although these are important invaders at Jasper Ridge, the studies of them have important lessons for other species as well. For example, on the study of the yellow star thistle, the questions are actually very similar. Who are the casualties when an invasive species comes in? And what are the consequences for the whole ecosystem, potentially, of losing certain species and having them be replaced by another species?
I'm trying to figure out what grassland species here in California are good competitors with this invader that we have, yellow star thistle. It's a nasty invader from Turkey, and it's spread all over California. I have all these different pots with different numbers of species growing in them, and then I've introduced star thistle to some of them, and I'm seeing which communities limit star thistle's growth the most. Land managers are having a lot of problems with star thistle all over California, all over the western United States really right now. I'm hoping that I can come up with a combination of species or a strategy of reseeding a managed area with native species that will prevent the invasion of star thistle, or at least make it more difficult for star thistle to take over a grassland.
Whereas the problem of biodiversity has many local dimensions, the changing atmosphere is truly global in effect. The amount of CO2 change that we're seeing on Jasper Ridge is exactly that we're seeing in other parts of the world. And so the experiments that we're doing are of relevance everywhere instantly.
I'm looking at the effects of elevated atmospheric carbon dioxide on grassland ecosystems. These chambers back here were full of growing plants. There are 3 chambers at elevated CO2 concentration and 3 chambers at just regular ambient CO2 concentration. Basically, my research involved planting my communities and then maintaining them over the course of the growing season. My helpers also helped me collect seeds of the species grown in the communities to look at the effects of my treatments on next generation. I'm really interested in how human actions affect the world at a global scale. How does fossil fuel burning affect ecosystems and either increase or slow down the rate of CO2 increase and therefore the rate of global change?
Now we're looking not only at CO2 increase, but the increase in atmospheric nitrogen deposition, increase in temperature, change in water availability. And these changes are very complex, and they offer opportunities for many students to become involved in these projects.
These studies of the response of California grasslands to atmospheric CO2 concentration took advantage of one of the truly great strengths of the Jasper Ridge ecosystems, and that is that the grasslands here are dominated by annual plants, and that makes it possible to track multiple generations within the duration of a single project or a single grant. The serpentine grasslands probably represent the best picture that we have of what California really used to look like. These grassland communities are important because they have very many species growing in them, and almost all of them are native. So there are a number of ecological questions that you can ask by studying these systems. One of the new research projects combines sort of traditional themes of research at Jasper Ridge with new techniques, matching up the relationship between where species are found at Jasper Ridge, the kind of microclimates that they're found in, and where they're found in California as a whole.
2.5 centimeters long.
From a global change perspective, you can ask the question, well, if you slightly shifted the microclimate, where would you lose a species at Jasper Ridge, and similarly, where would you lose it throughout California?
We're really focusing on the chaparral, which are all these plants of this shrubby Mediterranean vegetation, very characteristic of California. What we're looking at here is the way these plants divide up the environment they live in. They can divide up the space they live in, and they can also divide up different times of the year when they're active. And if you look at these hillsides around us, you see very characteristic patterns of which species are occupying different parts of the landscape.
Seems about 1 centimeter exactly.
We've been studying what's called the phenology of plants, the timing of all biological processes. So we come each month and we look at how many leaves are produced on each plant, when are they flowering, when are the seeds dispersing. And by following this over time, then we can begin to see how climate affects these processes in this community. What's really exciting in the long run is if we can understand how the timing of these processes changes in a wet year, in a dry year, or in a hot year, in a cool year, is we can begin to forecast what will happen with changing climate at a global scale.
One thing that's especially promising for the future of Jasper Ridge is that several of the young faculty members in biology already have very active research programs at Jasper Ridge. And I think that gives us an idea of what to expect in the future in terms of major research programs and opportunities for undergraduates. In total, there have been over 150 theses and dissertations and 350 student papers. In addition, there have been over 300 scientific publications reporting studies at Jasper Ridge. The research history of Jasper Ridge, in a sense, mirrors the research history of field biology in the U.S. as a whole, with a very large-scale switch to population biology, primarily as a result of Paul Ehrlich coming here.
When I first arrived at Stanford, Stanford owned Jasper Ridge, but they were using it to graze cattle. And it turned out that a butterfly that I was very interested in doing long-term studies of happened to fly on Jasper Ridge, the bay checker spot butterfly. And so I started working on it up there, and I began to get tired of my students being chased by bulls and such things, and so I worked on the university along with a whole bunch of colleagues for a substantial period of time before we finally got it set aside as a genuine biological field station.
The university realized it was going to have to do something, but they also knew that they didn't want to alienate their neighbors, who through the years had always enjoyed walking on the ridge and even riding horseback there. So the idea they came up with, I think, was a good one, and that was to set up a docent program. That's a greasewood or chemise. And community people could be docents and lead tour groups through to explain the research that's going on and to enlarge the local people's knowledge of this terrific island of biodiversity. And we have more pitcher sage here. People call these the Indian rocks here. If you come around this way, actually on the top you can see the places where they did grind their acorns. You can see 3 or 4, well 3 absolutely huge grinding depressions there. Here's another one here. Here's one. Here's one. See of the 3 there?
For at least 2,000 years, Jasper Ridge has felt the presence of human populations, including the Ohlone Indians, whose artifacts on the ridge can be dated back to 190 BC. As hunter-gatherers, the Ohlone drew upon the rich natural resources of the ridge, where they gathered acorns and berries, and hunted deer, river fish, and large mammals such as elk and bear. They managed the land, setting fires in the autumn to clear out the underbrush and to allow their favored plants to grow more easily.
When the Spaniards came in, they discovered Jasper Ridge. It was in the 1769, I think it was. Gaspar de Portola saw Jasper Ridge and saw this area, so this whole area was named for him.
A mere 8 years after the Spanish first observed Jasper Ridge, they used its forest of ancient redwoods to build San Francisco's Mission Dolores, as well as Mission Santa Clara. Mission cattle and horses grazed its green hillsides. And then in the mid-1800s, large-scale logging began.
They had a port, Redwood City, of course, where a lot of these logs were shipped by barge. It decimated a lot of these huge groves. So we're lucky to have a few of these giants left in here. This is sort of like a natural cathedral in here, I always think.
The first community of Europeans was established on the ridge in 1851 as a result of the lumber mill erected on the San Francisquito Creek. This small town, known as Searsville, consisted primarily of lumbermen from New England who'd tried their hand at amassing a fortune in the gold fields of the Sierras, but failed. Within 15 years, most of the nearby redwoods that supported the town had been cut down and resulted in torrential floods and mudslides. The residents of Searsville were forced to evacuate their homes, and many homes were destroyed. By the time Leland Stanford Sr. acquired the land of Jasper Ridge in 1880, the town of Searsville was almost a thing of the past. With most of its ancient redwoods gone, it was now the waters of the ridge that attracted human populations. The San Francisquito Creek, one of the drainages from the Santa Cruz Mountains, became a primary target. This valuable resource was acquired by the Spring Valley Waterworks Company, which planned to dam the creek and sell the water to San Francisco. Despite some local protest, the dam was built in 1891 and the fertile waters of the Santa Cruz Range captured. The dam's unusual structure of discrete concrete blocks gives it flexibility to this day. Indeed, it survived the 1906 earthquake, which destroyed many of the finest buildings on Stanford campus, only 6 miles away. But in the end, the first water that flowed to the university proved to be unpalatable, yellow and with a muddy residue. By 1910, the Spring Valley Waterworks began exploring Crystal Springs as an alternate reservoir. And in 1919, the company formally deeded the Searsville Reservoir to Stanford University. With the rights to the land of Jasper Ridge, Stanford also inherited Domenico Grosso.
And there was an old miner who lived up here, and he was called the Hermit of Jasper Ridge. And his name was Domenico Grosso, and he was one of Garibaldi's men who had come over from Italy. And he was given the mining rights, and he had very bad luck with most of the digging.
While the mineral rights he retained gave him only the most modest living from the sale of ore, Domenico Grosso's reputation as a hospitable and popular host prospered during his years on the ridge. Hikers of all kinds found their way to his table, including students from the newly founded Leland Stanford Junior University, who nicknamed him the Hermit. Under his hand, the ridge blossomed with flowers, fruit trees, and a vineyard on the lower slope. After his death in 1915, the land of Grosso's benevolent reign became pasture land for cattle once again. Soon the Searsville Reservoir also began to feel the pressures of increased use. In competition with the aquatic bird population, people were attracted to its waters. In 1922, the west shore of the lake was purchased and converted into a recreation park by Stanford swimming instructor Ernie Branston. Under his coaching, Olympic swim teams were trained in the lake until 1936. And the Olympic high diving trials were held in its waters in 1923. By the 1960s, the lake had become a picnic area for local families, as well as a hangout for teenagers. Much of Stanford's other Jasper Ridge holdings were also used regularly by picnickers, horse riding clubs, and by hikers. In 1959, as the public usage of the ridge increased, Stanford biology professors began to push the university to preserve the land, and eventually they succeeded. In 1973, the university trustees designated 960 acres as Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve and closed it to the public. Within 2 years, the university bought out the Searsville concessionaire and added the lakelands to the fledgling preserve.
Before the biological preserve was established, one of our biggest concerns working on Jasper Ridge was to keep intruders out of our experimental areas. Now we don't have to worry about that anymore, which is one of the reasons it's become a very heavily used research area.
The way they built the dam is like a pyramid, like a Mexican pyramid.
Of course it's...
How wide is it at the base? Because it's holding a lot more water pressure
so the base, of course, is much wider than it is at the top.
We have an incredibly devoted set of docents who contribute enormously to Jasper Ridge, giving tours to student groups and all classroom groups that come out to Jasper Ridge, and also providing many of the resources that the researchers depend on. Things like the bird monitoring, the plant collection that's now being updated, record keeping, and all kinds of things.
When I first came to Stanford University, we didn't have the protection that we have. We didn't have the facilities that we have. It was all open. And we didn't have a connection with the community. We didn't have a docent program. The docent program, to me, is extraordinarily important because it provides the link between what the researchers are doing, what the students are doing, and the general community. It's a support group for the Ridge, a very important support group, because it publicizes what's happening, and it makes the researchers feel like what they're doing is important, because they know that their results are going to get to a larger local community as well as through the normal channels of publication into the scientific community.
Serpentine's really tough and really hard.
As a docent, I particularly like youngsters because I think if you can touch someone who's a teenager, they might go on into science. And I think we need more people in science in America today. I never walk the ridge that I don't see something new, and I can say that after 22 years.
Jasper Ridge is significant because of the decision and the commitment that it reflects on the part of Stanford University. The decision to preserve a piece of land that is economically of incredible value, to protect it and preserve it, and to never sell it or use it for anything else.
The future of Jasper Ridge, I think, is very bright. And why I say that is because of the increased attention that it's gotten in recent years. There are more people know about what's happening. There are more students working out here. There are more important research projects going on, and more people learning about what's going on. And so how could it not be but a bright future for this facility?
Someone who is not a biologist or not an academic should not be concerned with the research going on in Jasper Ridge unless they have some concern about their future or their children's future or their grandchildren's future, because the kind of research that goes on at Jasper Ridge is helping us to try and solve the problems of how we keep our civilization going.